Alright, this is my video, which is going to be about psychologism, and this is because I'm doing a series on Edmund Husserl's logical investigations, and also the intro to that, which is the prologue to pure logic. And I don't want to do chapters 3 through 10, which are about his critique of psychologism. I've done enough on it. Did like 2 videos a long time ago, and I don't want to read it. And I don't want to read it no more. So this is just going to be a little quick discussion about that with respect to Husserl's and Andre Bergson and Willard Van Orman Quine, which is a philosopher which is long after both of those. Psychologism is the philosophy which says that there is a psychological correlate to any mental act. Let's say if I feel like I'm feeling bluish, whatever that means, there's a certain psychological state which is going on in here, whether it be some psychologistic philosophers and also psychologists will say that there's something happening in your cerebrum, or like Bergson is somebody we'll talk about here. They'll say, well, there's a psychological state going on, or there's a certain thing happening in your medulla oblongata or your cerebrum or whatever, and Husserl discusses, and I'm not going to really go into really depth about what he does because I'm done with that show, and I want to move on to other stuff. It's mostly, he says that he critiques it about he kind of critiques it in that we should not look at it in terms of a certain psychological state or a certain psychological, brain thing going on or whatever. It should be just, we look at that in terms of consciousness. It's kind of like, epistemology in the 1960s. It's about that too. We should just look at it in terms of consciousness. Look about it in terms of acts of consciousness. Acts of perception and such. We should stick to that. Not think about it in terms of a certain psychological correlate or a certain brain state. Now, if the recent break off from philosophy into neuroscience is basically science about certain states that are occurring inside of the brain, which are supposed to correlate to a certain mental event, or a certain way that you are at a certain time T and date D. I forget what those neuroscientists are, but if you read Susan Black, she discusses that. Francis Crick, I think, was one. And then you have David Chalmers, who discusses this. There's the hard problem of consciousness. This is big stuff in the philosophy of mind and neurophilosophy. So philosophy that is psychologistic is stuff that is philosophy that says that a lot of ways to gain knowledge about us and about the brain and about us and about our consciousness and stuff is to understand the brain. And Husserl, in many different ways throughout those chapters, and in many different angles he cuts at it. Like I said, I'm not going into it in depth. I just want to discuss it briefly. He kind of just argues against it, and then if you read the actual logical investigations and you read all of his work, you will agree. You'll see in what way he really is not. In what way he really wants to be doing philosophy, and not in that psychologistic sense. And furthermore, if you read Andre Bergson, he is I mean, he's definitely. I would not say that he is psychologistic. I wouldn't say he is. Some may say he is, but he really isn't, because he argues in this book, and was this is Matter and Memory, by the way. He argues that we should not think about philosophy. We should not think about anything in terms of a certain mental state having a certain brain correlate. So, I mean, he said that there might be some kind of certain activity going on in the brain which can be correlated with a certain mental state, but we can't really get anything wholeheartedly or surely found on that. We can't really do that, and we shouldn't look at philosophy in terms of that either. We should just look at it, and he discusses in this pure perception, and he talks about images and matter and all that stuff and consciousness, and it's just a really awesome book in this. But he does talk about cerebral action, cerebral events and stuff like that, and nerves going on. So he does discuss that, as he does think about psychologists like Faraday and Ribot. But he definitely is not really. He definitely is not like that. If you read Mind Energy, a lot of his other works, you'll see how he really just is not like that. He doesn't want to think about philosophy in terms of figuring out what's going on in here, as to gain understanding about how consciousness works. Now, if you want somebody who really is psychologistic, you can kind of compare that with naturalism. Psychologism and naturalism, which would be Willard Van Orman Quine in his one, and basically a lot of his writings, but in the main one I would say would be Epistemology Naturalized, which is in the book called Ontological Relativity and Other Essays, and in that he discusses how epistemology should be natural science. It should be a chapter of psychology. Epistemology should have the should be freely doing empirical psychology. It should be figuring out what goes on in the act of in the act of perceiving things, and figuring out how we know things and all that stuff. Epistemology in general, is a idea of that it's somewhat of a fact, and then if you read before that two dogmas of empiricism, and also if you understand what went on in the entirety of logical positivism, from the Vienna Circle on, in Moritz Schlick, Rudolf Carnap, A.J. Ayer, and Otto Neurath, then you can really understand where he's coming from. It's naturalistic in that we can look at epistemology in terms of how as to how we gain knowledge of things is a natural way. It's natural. It's the way things are naturally. That's a brief and bad way of explaining that naturalism. If you want to go more in depth with that, there is a Stanford Encyclopedia article on that. Those are kind of a couple of different views, and I highly suggest reading Quine's work and Husserl's and Bergson's and whatever. Personally, I would say that we should not look at philosophy of our brains and of our minds and of knowledge, not really in terms of psychology, but more in terms of just doing the philosophy like we really always have. Not in the Carnap, reductionist sense, but more just, especially what follows Quine in contemporary epistemology. That's definitely, I think, is the way to think about things. But let me know what you think. I mean, I personally don't think that. I think we can learn from neuroscience. We can learn from psychology. We can learn from really all that stuff. But I don't really see a need to base all of our philosophy on that alone.